At long last, I'm finally completing the ISFP video, or rather I'm beginning the audio for the ISFP video, which will hopefully be complete. Anyway, I apologize if this sounds a little bit rushed. It's not. I've spent a lot of time on it as much as with the other videos. It's just the circumstances that I've had to work with to try to get it done have made it a little different, so I apologize for that, but if I didn't work with the circumstances, it just simply wouldn't get done. So thank you very much for your patience. Without further ado, I will begin, reading through the script for the ISFP video, but adding anything that I feel is necessary to. So, some general observations about the ISFP. They are remarkably similar in demeanor to the INTJ. They too seem to harbor very private, weighty ideas which distract them from the outside world, something I described about INTJs before. They are gentle, serene, and graceful in their presentation. They're generally not so much uneasy around people as they are simply mild and shy. Kind of like the INFP, they have an overflow of warmth that waters those around them and ornaments whatever unease they do have. They often seem amiably unsure what to do sociably, and there's often a quirky degree of detachment when it comes to the unwritten rules of conduct, because they are very independent when it comes to making value judgments of things. So they decide for themselves what and who is pleasant or unpleasant, but they are rarely very forcefully assertive about this. They are not otherworldly beings, by the way, although they might seem like it. They are very much people, as people often make them out to be, but they are very much people with personal interests that ground them here on Earth. They don't come off as empty-headed or alien-headed. They have a natural instinct for making their own personal music, art, or expression, and tend to encourage others to tap into this creative drive and express themselves for themselves alone. There is an inner tension between their desire to experience life in the moment, extroverted sensation, and the desire to delve into possibilities and ideas spanning the past and the future, introverted intuition. Finally, the image that I generally see behind the ISFP type, and this is just how I imagine it, is of a solitary, eccentric inventor. Please follow me here for a moment. He or she lives in a lonely but picturesque lighthouse just outside of the seaside village. I don't know why it's a seaside village, maybe because it's a lighthouse. And occasionally some of the village children will come and visit and discover inside there's this quiet and mild-mannered sort of fellow creating these fascinating little clockwork animals or some other little magical work of art or something without any real regard for the quarrels or prejudices or all the drama going on in the town that's below them. And thus in their own attitude and the expression of their attitude onto their surroundings, they sort of effortlessly furnish this safe haven for from the judgment and hassle of society that people can come to when they want. In Psychological Types, Jung discusses some of the traits peculiar to introverted feeling. It demands a more than ordinary descriptive or artistic capacity before the real wealth of this feeling can ever be approximately presented or communicated to the outer world. In order to communicate with others, it has to find an external form which is not only fitted to absorb the subjective feeling in a satisfying expression, but which must also convey it to one's fellow man in such a way that a parallel process takes place in him. End of quote. In other words, for an introverted feeling dominant type to present or communicate what goes on in their inner world, they must find suitable containers to convey that information. But FI fosters psychic materials that do not lend themselves to containment or conveyance, i.e. feelings, emotions, values, passions, etc. Hence why it takes a more than ordinary descriptive or artistic capacity in order to communicate them. Jung points out how because introverted thinking judgments are purely descriptive, they are far easier to communicate than introverted feeling judgments, which are purely matters of feeling and tone, transcending mere description. The TI type's inner ideas are more like geometric crystals. They lend themselves to representation. It's just a matter of measuring them properly and getting the proportions right on paper. But the FI type's inner ideas are more like sensations of heat, or the odor of wood smoke, or the pleasant savor of sautéed mushrooms. In short, nuanced emotions. Those sort of experiences are much more difficult to represent to someone without just experiencing it for yourself. This is the dilemma of the FI type, and especially the ISFP, as their inner experience is dominated by these kinds of non-linguistic experiences. I emphasized this a great deal in my original ISFP video, and I bring it up again because it is still a very important part of understanding the experience of FI in general. As such, the ISFP's inner world seems to be something of a primordial tumult of feeling tones and emotions that rarely disturb the pristine surface of the ISFP, but there's a lot going on underneath that. As with all introverted functions, it is a matter of what is constellated in the subject, as Jung puts it, and not what causes the constellation itself. An object presses itself against the membrane of the subject's mind, and the effect of this object is only realized deep beneath the surface, where it joins all the other effects and ripples still going on down there. It is specifically this part of the ISFP that they struggle to relate to people. ISFPs aren't challenged in all of their communication, it's simply that they struggle to express this major part of themselves, their inner world, in a way that makes them feel fully connected with and understood by and appreciated by people. And this is often best solved through artistic, or one might even just say more broadly signifying or symbolic, forms of expression. The FI experience carries such importance because, as with all introverted functions, FI acts as a lens through which the whole world is viewed. The constellations that are formed in the ISFP are interpreted as an insight into the outside world because these experiences concern inner mental structures that are shared by all humans, i.e. Jung's theory of the inherited collective unconscious. Thus, the ISFP's inner world obtains great relevance to the external world. It shapes the subject's experience of the outside world. Just as the INTJ sees evidences for their grand theories everywhere in the world, so too does the ISFP perceive their world as reflecting their own inner emotions and feelings. Their whole demeanor has this kind of sublimity to it. Their inner being is poetically reflected in the outer world, which returns to affect the inner being again. This leads into another important aspect of the ISFP that I discussed in my original video. Here I will refer to it as the ISFP's sense of personal style, referring to their outward expression of their FI values. While the INFP is more intentionally iconoclastic, boundary-pushing, exploratory, and as a necessary result of this, eclectic in their style, which is as a result of their NESI, flavored FI, if you want to put it that way, the ISFP is far more consistent, unintentionally iconoclastic, or that's how it seems, consolidated, self-sufficient, and altogether more uniform or strictly thematic in their style as a result of SENI flavored FI. In other words, the INFP's individualism is more on the prowl for new possibilities and new boundaries to push because of NE, being tapered only by a tertiary sense of the past and routine and SI familiarity. The ISFP, however, is far more self-sufficient in the sense that their boundary pushing comes entirely from within themselves, from introverted intuition. They don't go out and find their individualistic style, rather it constellates and blossoms within them naturally. There's a definite sense with the ISFP, intriguingly reminiscent of the INTJ and INFJ, of their genius coming directly from within, of their wealth and wisdom overflowing from inside of them where it had incubated, as opposed to the INFP, whose brilliance comes more from their personal values applying themselves to and dealing with outside situations and ideas. For instance, there's the contrast between John Lennon and Paul McCartney, namely that Lennon was an observant social commentator more of the time, noting the way in which the world violated his values, while McCartney, the ISFP, was far more focused on his own feelings and expression, never really becoming irritated with the world unless he was irritated himself. The ISFP is far less assertive than the INFP can sometimes be, because they are far more self-contained. This is why the ISFP is so often noted to be particularly graceful, otherworldly, gentle, kind, polite, courteous, and so forth. The primary point I would like to make about extroverted sensation in the ISFP is its conflict and partial triumph over their tertiary introverted intuition. The ISFP is in touch with the removed contemplation of introverted intuition to the degree that there is an inner conflict between wanting to live in the moment and drink in all the potentially important and beautiful details of the moment, SE, and the pull to sometimes retreat inwards and experience the intuitive ripples or conjectures created by those experiences, NI. INTJs and INFJs can experience a reversal of this conflict, where they suddenly realize that they are missing out on incredibly sensual and beautiful experiences in the real and present world, but then struggle to focus on this world without slipping into NI contemplation for more than a few moments or minutes. For the ISFP, it's the opposite. It's a more mutual conflict between the opportunities and beauty presented by the real and present world and those proffered by the inner, time-traveling, conjecturing world. But when push comes to shove, the real and present world wins the ISFP's focus. But the conflict definitely shapes the ISFP's nature, and they often try to make concessions to it in their thinking. In any case, the winning extroverted sensation involves a focus on what's really going on right now. Structurally, extroverted sensation is the function that relies on the concrete and often sensory information that is sort of coming off of objects, to put it that way. It has the most direct, gritty, down and with it or photographic relationship with the objective world. The ISFP, then, is fascinated by, highly observant of, and something of a connoisseur of sensual experience. Often enough, that also includes any experience towards which the ISFP relates in a highly direct and non-associative manner, taking things to be what they are, not what they could be, or seem to be, or simply relate to. That's extroverted intuition. In other words, they are not as aggressive in perceiving the world, in the very simple sense that extroverted sensation takes things as they are, while extroverted intuition in the INFP does not. Obviously, INFPs aren't aggressive in the normal sense either, but they are not as adaptable or easygoing as the typical ISFP is. In my original ISFP video, I talked about the idea that ISFPs adapt very well to the outside world as a result of their extroverted sensation, rather like an expert surfer whose motion and power comes from gliding over the ocean's surface. They live in the moment in a peculiarly graceful way. They feel no need to impose structure on the world as a result of their inferior extroverted thinking, and they generally perceive the world in very direct, sensual terms, on its own terms, extroverted sensation, meaning that they are both self-sufficient, introverted feeling, and in tune, extroverted sensation, with the sensory changes occurring around them, and can ride over them like they are waves, rather like the ISTP. A fascinating and often overlooked aspect of the ISFP is their tertiary NI, which plays a significant role in their mental life. As with all tertiary functions, its bobbing on the brink of consciousness makes it tantalizing because you can only catch hold of it for short spaces of time, so it's nearly impossible to become disenchanted with it. The ISFP's experience of NI will sound remarkably familiar to the NI dominant types, as though the most dominating aspect of their mental life were shrunk down and put into the background only. ISFPs I've known have been very intrigued or surprised when they become conscious of a background process, NI, that is synthesizing, relating, and conjecturing about all the SE material that they receive. They are so used to the raw experience of that extroverted sensation information that the mechanism that's webbing it all together into the wisdom and understanding in their unconscious, generally in the form of mental images, as I discussed in the INTJ video, this process never ceases to cause wonder or intrigue in them, and even confusion. To the INTJ, it might seem as though the ISFP is continually rediscovering the experience of NI for the first time. This experience of mental images imposes itself on the ISFP's mind with the same self-justifying force that all plane perceptions warrant. In other words, there is a clear conflict between their clear and pressing perceptions of the real world around them and the clear and pressing perceptions of the ideas and inner images within them. This is important to understand, even if it is not something that is immediately noticeable about ISFPs. There is a conflict between SE and NI, which does tend to be the case with all types inner functions, by the way. The dichotomy is between opportunities offered by immediate experience and those offered by contemplative transcendent experience. The ISFP tends to flip between these two, with immediate experience generally gaining the upper hand and garnering more for them. The ISFP experiences flashing of fleeting ideas and feelings, though, and fascinating syntheses that they want to catch and experience more fully. But whereas the INTJ and INFJ more often are distracted from their immediate experience by those kinds of potential epiphanies, and they tend to easily zone out, the ISFP has the opposite problem of sort of zoning in when they're trying to pay attention to an inner idea. The ISFP can be frustrated about this because they want to experience NI more. It's their tertiary. They are conflicted between living in the moment and transcending it in their inner life, and that sort of adds a bit to the otherworldliness there. They don't want to miss anything important in observing real life, but they are also aware of their NI insights and their importance and possibilities. Ideally, you don't want to miss out on either, but NI can provide the stronger argument sometimes because of its novelty, saying, you already live in the moment all the time, but don't you think that there's more to life beneath the surface? Don't you think that there's some more greater wisdom to be had through this mysterious synthesizing sense within you? However, the ISFP is also aware of the limitations of NI. More importantly, they can feel that NI comes to overly dogmatic conclusions within them, because it does not formulate conjectures so much as simply sees those conjectures, and thus it presents its conclusions with the same force of a sensory fact. It is taking the wide breadth of data collected by SE and analyzing it, which necessarily means that the data is narrowed down, it's interpreted, and thus aspects of the data are necessarily cut out and negated in favor of the image that is arising from the data. It's rather like an art critic proposing Marxist ideals as the underlying theme in all of Picasso's works. That is an image that has arisen for the NI type out of the raw data, and this image obtains for the NI type a vibrancy and reality that rivals and supersedes the raw data it came out of. But for the ISFP, where NI is tertiary, both the raw data and the image in the data are perceived with rivaling vibrancies, causing the ISFP to feel as though the NI image is dulling aspects of the raw SE data that would be enjoyable to explore and may hold even more insights. At bottom, it's a conflict between depth and breadth, conclusions versus more exploration. In general, the repression of extroverted thinking is basically synonymous with the overall dominance of introverted feeling. So when the ISFP is not concerning themselves with the possibilities offered by their unconscious extroverted thinking, they will tend towards more both the advantages and the pitfalls of dominant introverted feeling use without really thinking about it. In the ISFP's case, this is primarily the tendency to ignore facts in favor of feelings and to have trouble operationalizing their passions. However, the ISFP is not at all ignorant of these problems. They're very acquainted with them, probably more acquainted with them than we are, and can become frustrated by their difficulty with bringing those problems to the fore. The introverted feeling exclusion of facts, especially in the ISFP, manifests in the sentiment of, put it in long words, this is how I feel right now in this moment, and that is what is most important to me right now, because it's so much more vivid than anything else, least of all these dull, lifeless so-called facts that you keep on mentioning. In short, the ISFP can come off as artistically free-spirited because they want to live more in the moment and they don't want to miss the possible sensations of the moment, and for this reason they might ignore the facts that would limit their experience of the moment and the here and now expression of their FI feelings. The ISFP's frustration with operationalizing their passions practically in the world. That was not a complete sentence. Anyway, ISFPs, at least those I've seen, often feel inadequate at actively accomplishing things and working effectively with the world and its framework of rules. Their feeling and in-the-moment exploration tends to lift them away from the grid, the TE grid. It is very hard to keep FI and SE within the bounds that TE has set for it. They kind of keep zigzagging and wanting to break those boundaries and impositions in favor of a transcendent beauty in the world and in their inner life. To put it in a very stereotypical sense, the ISFP constantly being late to meetings because the imposition of the meeting structure conflicts with them trying to live in the moment and give certain people proper attention. It can be the same thing with the INFP, that they have trouble staying within the impositions that they've set for themselves. Not that an ISFP will necessarily be late to meetings. That's just that's one way that I've sometimes seen it occur. In any case, what I wrote in my script here was like a butterfly, of course, trying to follow a flat wire grid. It takes a great deal of energy for them to restrict their flight patterns to just those sort of stale rules. So I hope that this video was useful to you. That's all I have for you right now. It's been a real delight, actually, even though it's taken so long and I've only been very intermittent in studying it. It's been very fascinating studying ISFP. I hope these insights were useful. I hope that this video's at least in content on par with the others. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope you enjoyed this video, as I keep on saying. And I will see you in the next video. Hopefully it will not take this long. I've just been stressed with a lot of work, but I'll put that in the description below anyway. So thank you very much for everything you guys do, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.